Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about the very interesting Montana Senate race in the 2024, of course, elections across the board. And Montana, very uniquely, I should say, has a Democratic senator. Jon Tester is his name. He is the incumbent senator from Montana. This is despite Montana being a heavily Republican state. They voted for Donald Trump by 16.4% in the last election, as you can see there. So it's very surprising to see Montana actually having a Democratic senator. But Jon Tester in 2024, he's running for, I believe, his third term. He's definitely had more than one term right now. I know he was reelected in 2018, but that was a midterm election year. This election is very different for someone like Jon Tester because it is being held alongside the presidential election. So what that means is that voters are going to be much more partisan when they vote down ballot for Senate, for governor, for House, compared to a midterm election year. That's just how it is. I mean, when you don't have much split ticket voting anymore. In the 2016 and 2020 elections, there was only one case where a state voted for one party on the presidential level and then voted for the different party in the Senate. That was in Maine in 2020. Only once in 2016 and 2022. That's pretty incredible. So it will be interesting to see if this occurs again in 2024, but I certainly doubt it will be in Montana. My message to Democrats, if Democrats are trying to win control of the Senate in 2024, this is my current prediction, I would tell them to abandon Montana, go for Texas. Montana is becoming more and more out of grabs, which is not something that we expected, right? I certainly wasn't expecting to tell Democrats if they want to win control of the Senate, then they should abandon Montana and try for Texas. Considering the fact that Montana, you have an incumbent, right? Jon Tester, he is the incumbent, and that in Texas you don't. That would be a very difficult but possible flip. But we are approaching a point where I can confidently say that Democrats simply have better chances in flipping Texas than they do in keeping Montana. It will be extremely hard. So anyway, I didn't even talk about this new poll, but we have a new poll from RGM, which is a awful pollster. It's C rated, right? It's not a very good pollster at all, but it's besides the point. What we're gonna do is compare it to their last poll, but I mean, I'm making this video today because there's a new poll from Montana that shows Tim Sheehy, the Republican challenger, up by 7% on Jon Tester, an incredible 7%. Mind you, Jon Tester is the incumbent, and he's losing by 7%. Now, just take a look here. This was the single poll that Democrats had that kept their faith alive. Whatever little faith they had for Jon Tester, it was kept alive last month in August when the same pollster, RGM Research, released a poll that showed Jon Tester up by 5. Now, this was an extreme outlier, but it kept Democratic hopes alive. As you can see, all the polls before that, Sheehy plus 6, plus 2, that's Nero plus 5, Jon Tester plus 5, but that was before the poll. Now let's take a look at the most recent polls in this race. Sheehy plus 7 in public opinion strategies. Sheehy plus 8, plus 6, plus 7. This last plus 7 poll is the same RGM research that had him up by 5 just a month ago, a 12-point trend in just over a month's time. It's over in Montana. Jon Tester can pack it up. He's not going to win this race. For one thing, the polling isn't going to be off 8 points or so in a Senate race in favor of Democrats. That can happen sometimes, like in Maine, with that split ticket voting. It can happen for Republicans usually, for in odd cases for Republicans, but you very typically see that for Democrats. And I do want to bring this up too because from using historical context, it's more likely than anything that Jon Tester is currently being overestimated in the polling. So we can actually use the state of Montana for an example. In 2020, the very popular Democratic governor, Steve Bullock, that's very different from Senate, Governor Steve Bullock, he ran against Steve Daines, the incumbent Republican senator from Montana. This is 2020, remember. He ran against Steve Daines. And the poll said, these were the polls from 2020. They said it would be an incredibly close race. New York Times had Steve Daines up by 1. Data for Progress had Bullock up by 1. Public Policy Polling had it even. And then the very last polls were Daines plus 4, Bullock plus 1, Bullock plus 1, Daines plus 3. Every forecaster had it as a toss-up. When you look at this polling, it was because, a wide range of polls had Steve Daines winning, another wide range of polls had Steve Bullock winning, so it really did look like it was pure toss-up. Ready for the results? It was Steve Daines plus 10. It's just loading here. But it ended up being Steve Daines plus 10, and that was a huge surprise to everyone. As you can see there, 10.0 on the dot. Much different from the polling that we saw. I mean, if you averaged out these polls, Steve Daines was probably ahead by 2 or 3. He ended up winning by 10. And I'm sure you're wondering why. Was this a case of Steve Bullock specifically? Was he, whatever, way overestimated? Is it a case of just Democrats always being overestimated in Montana? It's neither of those things. What it really is, um, uh, let's see, let me put it this way. This is the simplest way I could put it. Polls always overestimate how much voters will split ticket vote. In 9 out of 10 times, they overestimate, the abundance of split ticket voting. The one time they actually underestimated it, and it was by a lot, was in 2020, and that was we're going back to Maine when Susan Collins won in the Senate despite Joe Biden winning the state of Maine on the presidential level. So, but in the vast majority of cases, polls always overestimate how much voters will split ticket vote. Come election day, voters in Montana, after seeing some John Tester ads, they say, "Yeah, I like this guy enough, and I know him. I recognize him a lot. I'm very familiar with him, what he stands for. Sure, I'll answer him that I'm voting for him in a poll. Sure, and then say I'm also voting for Trump. A lot of Republicans might say that in these polls, but when it actually comes to election day and they go in the booth to vote." It was like, well, I'm voting Trump on the presidential level. I'll just vote Republican down ticket, right? It doesn't matter that much. That's what commonly happens. And Montana isn't a particularly independent state like Maine. That's what allowed Susan Collins to win while Joe Biden won by so much on the presidential level. That's why. So, you know, Montana is a very different case. And considering the fact that Donald Trump is on track to win by somewhere around 15 to 16 points in Montana right now, and we saw in 2020 how the polls in Montana overestimated how much people would split ticket vote. That would mean, using historical context, that John Tester would be overestimated in even these polls, where he's ahead. So it's over. John Tester is losing the Senate race in Montana. This race has changed dramatically. It appeared he had a chance a number of months ago, but since then, even in the polls, voters have become much more partisan. It's over, and it matters a lot. Because Senate control hinges on a few states, and, not so much Montana anymore just because we know how it's going to vote. Democrats need to focus on keeping Ohio. This is my forecast, by the way, right now. They need to focus on keeping Ohio. That's critical. If they lose Ohio, I mean, it's completely over, and Republicans have an outright majority of more than 51 seats. Um, so Democrats, they need to keep Ohio. And look, these are my ratings right now. I think that Tim Sheehy wins by over 5%, considering everything I just talked about, and that Texas is becoming closer and closer with every poll that we get. Ted Cruz is in serious trouble here. It's looking like this will be a close race. Simply put, Texas will be closer than Montana. I am extremely confident of that. Democrats should try to flip Texas, maybe, get this Hail Mary from Texas, get this huge upset, and that's how they keep the Senate if they do manage to keep all of their other seats and still lose Montana. It's doable. With them losing West Virginia, they're already down to 50 seats, so they either have to keep all their seats, which is now not possible with Montana really in Republican hands, or they can spare one, that being Montana, and trade it for a Republican seat, that being Texas. But still, Republicans are favored to win control of the Senate in 2024. So thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe. That helps out so much. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers before Election Day. Maybe we can do it, maybe not, but you can still help. That would help out greatly. So again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.